Welcome to Ruby on Rails webinar from jpassion.com. So today's topic is RSpec 1, and we have two more topics to cover during the next 2 weeks: authentication using device and deployment using cloud. Okay, so let's move on to the presentation. So we're going to actually cover RSpec in two sessions, RSpec 1 and RSpec 2. So this one will cover some basics of RSpec. So these are the topics that we are going to cover in this presentation. So we'll talk about what is and why you want to use RSpec. And then we are going to see how you can install and configure and run RSpec. And then we're going to learn RSpec vocabulary, meaning some of the RSpec language. And then we're going to learn the concept of subject, implicit subject, and explicit subject. And then we're going to focus on model testing with RSpec this time. And we are going to learn a couple of useful tools, Spork and Guard, in this presentation. And RSpec 2 will cover more advanced topics such as controller testing, view testing, and we'll cover more RSpec tools such as FactoryGirl and Faker, Capybara, and Lunchy. So what is and why RSpec? So you can think of RSpec as domain-specific language for specifying desired behavior for Ruby code. In fact, you can use RSpec for non-Rails code, meaning just standard Ruby code. So it is used as a testing tool for any Ruby application, including Rails. And of course, Rails is the most popular Ruby program. And it's born under the banner of behavior-driven development. And the behavior-driven development basically make your TDD a productive and enjoyable experience. And RSpec can do unit testing and functional and integration testing. So here we are going to mostly focus on unit testing in this presentation. And in RSpec 2, later on, we'll cover functional and integration testing. So the steps for BDD testing, behavior-driven development testing using RSpec goes these steps. And you're actually performing these 3 steps repeatedly. So you're going to actually write the behavior of your target, test target, as a set of spec examples. And we'll talk about what spec examples are all about in a few minutes. Basically, you're going to write in the testing code. And then you're going to run the test. And you're going to experience test failures because there is no the code that satisfies that test. So the third step is you're going to in fact write code, or you're going to refactor the code to correct the test failures. So you're going to actually write your testing code first before you write your business logic. So why RSpec? So RSpec scripts, and sometimes RSpec scripts are called specs. It enables building readable testing logic. So as you're going to see in a few minutes, the description that you're going to use to describe the behavior of test target can be actually used as a documentation. So documentation and testing and the code, they are very much aligned. So without using BDD kind of technique, you get into a situation where your documentation is not in sync with the code, your testing is not in sync with your code. So descriptions attached to the block of the code, so this is the testing code, form a readable sentence which describe the desired behavior. So you're going to see example of this in a few seconds. And RSpec is being used as a better alternative to Rails test system. So Rails does not come with RSpec as a default. So you have to actually specify your intention of using your RSpec. So in most cases, most popular Rails application, people use RSpec as alternative to default Rails test system. So as I said before, the usage of RSpec lets you describe the behavior of your target, a test target. And this is an example. So in this case, we have a very simple description of student model class. So in this case, this is the description. So student should have a name field, student should have age field, and student have email field. So this is basically like a documentation on what student model class is supposed to look like in terms of the attributes or fields. So just to summarize the RSpec features, it provides very rich command line program. So basically that's RSpec command you're going to see in a few minutes. Textual description of examples and groups. So basically that's coming from RSpec core. So this set of examples will actually constitute a behavior. And flexible and customizable reporting, and extensible expectation language, and also built-in marking and stubbing framework. So we're going to actually cover marking and stubbing in RSpec 2 as well. All right, so let's move on to the installation and running RSpec. Installation of RSpec is very simple. We are going to change your gem file to specify the indication of the usage of RSpec Rails. And then you're going to run bundle install. And then you're going to use a generator, Rails gen generator, and then you're going to say RSpec install. It will actually generate RSpec configuration files. And in terms of running RSpec, so once you have done this, and then you're going to write some spec, and then you're going to run your spec. So you can say RSpec spec, so it will run all specs on the spec directory. So when you run this, and we're going to actually see this one in demo. So when you run this one, it will actually generate a spec directory in your application. So on the spec directory, you're going to have a models spec or controller specs and view spec and things like that. So when you say RSpec spec, then it will run all specs. If you want to run just model specs, then you're going to specify spec and models. If you run a particular model spec, in this case student spec, then you're going to specify that particular spec file. And if you want to see documentation different from the default, then you're going to say format and documentation. Okay. Now, you can use RSpec to run the RSpec testing, but you can also use a rake command. Okay, so when you say rake -t and spec, then these are all rake commands that you can use. So here, basically rake spec controllers, you are running code examples, meaning spec examples on the spec controllers. Okay, so that's the same thing as RSpec, and then the path to the controllers, meaning the spec/controllers. And here, rake spec models. So you are running RSpec on all model specs. Okay, so that is the same thing as RSpec spec/models. All right, so let's move on to exercise 1. So in exercise 1, we are going to configure RSpec your application, and we're going to actually run the RSpec. So let's go to documentation. Exercise 1. So we're going to create a brand new Rails project. So I have already created Rails new RSpec app. Okay, so I have already created right here, and we're going to install RSpec the Rails gem. So we are going to change gem file. So I'm going to move this one right here. So I'm going to copy this code. So underneath here. Okay, save the change. So then we are going to bundle install. When you're running this bundle install for the first time, you're going to actually see installation of these RSpec files. Okay, but since I have already installed it, it will say just using. Okay, so this is the screen capture when I run this the bundle install first time. And then we are going to run Rails generate RSpec install. So here it's going to create a file called .rspec. So this one contains some configuration information of your RSpec. Then it will generate the spec directory, and then it will have spec helper RB file. So every spec should include the spec helper file. So let's generate these files. Rails generate RSpec. Oops, sorry. This gen RSpec install. And you can take a look at this spec helper file. So it does contain a bunch of configuration information right here. Okay, so let's just take a look at that. So it generated a spec directory, and this is spec helper file that was just generated. Okay, all right. Let's move on. Now we are going to generate a model. So here we are going to use generator, Rails generator and model. And the model's name is student and name, string and age integer. So here you can see it generates a spec file for student model. So in addition to generate a model class, it generates the test spec file. Okay, so I'm going to just copy Rails generate model of student. And then we'll take a look at the content of the student model spec file. So this is basically what you will see. Okay, so here we go. So let's take a look at the spec file. So on the models, this student spec file was generated. So as you can see, it contains describe method and the block, and here it has the appending. So you're going to actually learn the concept of appending later on a bit more detail. In a bit more detail, basically, it is just the indication of your testing intention. Okay. All right. Now we are going to perform the migration to generate a students table. And then we are going to take a look at the rake command as well as the RSpec command. Okay. So we are going to generate student table using migrate. So as we talked about, you can run your RSpec using either rake or RSpec. Okay, so let's try with the rake first. So I want to see all the commands, regarding to the RSpec. So I'm going to say rake all the task and spec. So this is what you have seen in the screen. So here I'm going to just run all the specs that we have. We have only one spec, which is just the model spec of student model class. Okay, so we're going to say rake and spec. And it's going to run the spec, and it will say pending because we have only one the spec example. Okay. All right. So as you can see, running rake spec, RSpecing is taking quite a bit of time, and it almost take about the 10 to 15 seconds. Okay. All right. So this star means as a default, this is actually providing a progress. Okay. So this means it's actually pending, and you can see there is one pending spec example. Okay. So this is our first the RSpec testing. Okay. All right. Now let's move on to, let's try to run RSpec as well. So we just run the rake, right? Okay, now we're going to use the RSpec. So you can actually see RSpec and all the help. Okay, so a couple of actually interesting options you can use with the RSpec. By the way, if you're using Windows, this RSpec command is residing on the gems 1.19.1 and bin. So you have to actually set this path to your bin directory. Okay, otherwise you're going to actually see this command not found problem. Okay, so either you can actually set this way on the particular terminal window, or you can actually use a control panel to set to add this path to your path environment variable, which I have already done that. Okay, one thing that you can specify, one option you can specify is a format. So default format is basically very simple, progress. Okay. Now, if you want to actually see a bit more readable format, then you're going to use the format and documentation, and you're going to actually see this one, So let's try that. So RSpec, spec, and dash format documentation. It actually provides a bit more readable the display. Okay, so instead of just using star in this case, it will actually give you the a bit more readable display like this. Okay, so this is a bit more readable than what we have seen here. Okay, all right. Okay, so you can actually run the RSpec using just RSpec spec, or you can use RSpec spec models, or you can just specify particular spec files. So that should actually come up with the same result. Okay, so I'm going to actually move on. Now, if you're using Sublime Text, you can actually use Sublime Text plugin to see the result running and see the result in the Sublime Text inside the Sublime Text. Okay, so basically what you have to do is install that plugin. So if you are using Windows, basically you go to that package directory, and then you're going to perform this git command. It's basically retrieving the plugin and installed it. Okay. And then if I actually go over here, and then I can actually say Control-Shift-T. So there are actually a few commands you can actually use. Control-Shift-T is run all the tests in the current file, and Control-Shift-E is run the last test, and Control-Shift-Alt is actually a single test. So I'm going to actually use the Control-Shift-T. Control-Shift-T. So again, it's taking about 15 seconds, and you are going to see the result here. Okay, so here, the same result. Okay, so you don't have to actually go to the terminal window to do that. Okay, so you can actually do that right here. We're going to actually use the terminal window in this case, in this demo. Okay, all right. Now, before we move on to exercise 2 and the next topic, I'm actually going to the last topic first. The reason is, so RSpec tools. Okay, the reason is I want to actually take advantage of what is called the Spork. As you have seen, every time you are running RSpec, it's actually recreating Rails environment, which takes about 15 seconds, and that is actually time consuming. So what you want to do is you want to have some kind of tool that actually start the Rails environment once, and then you can actually use Rails environment already started for testing. Okay, so that is actually Spork. Spork is basically loads a Rails environment just once, and all subsequent RSpec testing will use it. So you are not going to waste your time just getting the Rails environment restarted every time you're actually running the RSpec. So just for the demo purpose, I don't want to actually wait the 15 seconds every time I actually do the demo. So I'm going to use the Spork. So I'm going to actually go to exercise 5, and let's do that first. So that is Spork. So you're going to use exercise 4. Okay. So basically, you are going to use a Spork gem. So you are going to add this gem Spork. So I'm going to just add this one right here and save the change. And then I'm going to do bundle install. Okay. To handle the dependency. So, okay, so you can see I have already installed up Spork, so that's why it says using Spork. Okay, and so I've done that, and then you can actually generate you can generate the Spork configuration file by using Spork the bootstrap. Okay, so I'm going to say Spork. Okay, so it's basically generating the bootstrap file, its configuration file. Okay. So this file has been, in fact, the spec helper file is actually modified with this Spork information. So basically, what it does is that every time you're running RSpec, it will try to see if there is a Spork process is running. So Spork is actually a test server, and that actually provides a runtime Rails runtime environment, and that's going to be up and running. So that's what you're going to do here. So you can actually run the Spork. Okay, so we'll say Spork. Or bundle install, bundle exec Spork. So you can see it actually provides some Rails environment. Okay, so now from this point on, we can actually run. So I'm gonna actually go. I'm gonna just close this guy, and we're going to go our application. So now we can say RSpec. Now, in order to take advantage of this fork, you have to actually indicate that you are actually trying to talk to, already started Spork real server, test server. So you said that is actually DLD. So DLD means distribute Ruby. So here, the first time, it has to start, okay? So it takes about still 15 seconds, but next time you're running it, so if, you can see